and I'll just talk real quickly about the Harris Center. At the Harris Center, we hope to have people fall in love with this place. And we do that in a couple of different ways, from protecting land to educating people like this in Ask a Naturalist or in schools or public programs. We work in conservation research and do programs that are the salamander brigades, for example, that help cross thousands of salamanders and other amphibians across roads on the first rainy nights of spring. And all of this is made possible through the support of people like you and people showing up at programs like this. So welcome, everybody. Now, I'm going to ask our Ask a Naturalist panelists to introduce themselves. And today, you can tell us your name and what you do at the Harris Center, and how about your favorite thing in May? So I'm going to give you guys this is a new spin. So Miles, why don't you start us off?
All right. I'm Miles. I'm the office manager at the Harris Center, and I will echo Susie's sentiment about falling in love with the natural world. Every time I learn something new, the more I fall in love with it. It's fantastic. And I think that's what I love about May. Other than that, enjoy the mysteries and the discussion.
Oh, yeah. Well, thanks for that, Miles. How about Brett? Why don't you tell us about yourself and your favorite thing in May?
I'm Brett Thielen. I'm the science director at the Harris Center. I often answer amphibian and sometimes reptile questions at these Ask a Naturalist. And it's really hard to pick a favorite thing about May because there's a lot of amazing things. But today I just took a walk on our Hiroshi Loop Trail and saw about 7 different kinds of spring wildflowers. And I think that's pretty amazing about May. So the spring ephemeral wildflowers that are with us for a short time bring a lot of color to the woods.
Yay, thank you, Brett. I'm going to ask Eleanor to introduce herself. Eleanor, I hope you don't mind, but you're so important to the Harris Center, and here you are. Who are you, and what's your favorite thing about May?
Who am I? I once had an idea to start this organization that so it could protect Hancock and our beautiful area for us and everybody else who wants to come here. So anyway, and my favorite thing about May is all of the flowers, the tree flowers, as well as the daffodils and all that stuff. It's so beautiful after such a long time.
Oh my gosh, well said, Eleanor, well said. And how about Karen Seaver, who has so many of her family members in the audience tonight? Who are you and what's your favorite thing?
I'm Karen Seaver. Hi, everybody. I'm the staff ecologist at the Harris Center, and I'm a plant lover and an animal lover. And it's hard to choose my favorite thing about May, but one of my least favorite is the black flies, but my favoriteest is harder to choose, and I think it would have to be leaf out. I look forward to leaf out around Mother's Day, typically graduation weekend every year. I agree with Eleanor. It seems like a long time. I counted the months when I moved to New Hampshire. It's about 6 months with the leaves on and 6 months with the leaves off. So I love when nature takes that big old inhale of carbon dioxide.
Ooh, well said. It makes me want to go out and kiss an unfurling leaf. How about Margaret?
Hi, everybody. I'm Margaret Baker, and I'm a graphic designer, print designer for the Harris Center, and I make all the slides that we see on Ask a Naturalist. As Susie says, look pretty. So I have fun sizing photos and changing fonts and making colors come together and stuff. So my favorite thing about May is, I guess I've been thinking about the bird nest building that's happening all around. So I kind of think that's pretty special.
Oh, that's very sweet, Margaret.
Thanks for that question, Susie.
You're welcome. Phil Brown, what's up?
Hello there. Yeah, I'm Phil Brown. I'm the Hawk Watch coordinator. I've been out coordinating hawks in the woods, trying to find hawk nests today for the Harris Center on Harris Center properties. So let's see, my favorite thing about May, it is not easy to pick, but it's going to be in the bird realm. I'm a migration fanatic, so I'm really passionate about bird migration in the month of May, which is the most exciting season most exciting month of the year for birds, in my opinion. The explosion of birdsong and color into the woods. There are possibilities to see up to 20 species of these beautiful, colorful little gems called warblers. And this is the week for warblers. So everybody should get out and enjoy them a little bit.
Got
Pick
it.
an apple
No,
tree and just watch it for a while and you'll see some warblers.
I had no idea that this was Warbler Week. This is exciting. Is it as exciting as Shark Week? Okay. All right. Well, that's who we have on tap for the Hair Center panelists. Okay. Oh, this is a poll. So I'll read this question and then there'll be a poll. There were a series of 10 of these spread out over a distance of 100 feet in Monroe State Forest, Northern Mass on April 19th. Any idea what they are? We thought they might be scat, but couldn't figure out what animal may have made them. Space aliens? Thanks. Let's find out what you guys think. Here's a poll. What is this? Chocolate bar on a sunny day? Fungus, mud, or scat?
Here we are. Scat is the top
Yes.
vote, followed by
And
fungus.
that is exactly what this is. And since I forgot to mention that my area of interest is in mammals, this is some very specialized scat that you typically only see around this time of the year. Sometimes you can see it in the summer, but this is actually deer scat. And I'm going to get a little graphic. I like to call this juicy scat. And this is juicy scat because the deer have been eating for the longest time the inner bark of trees all winter long. And they might be supplementing that with some acorns if they're lucky enough to find them. But it's a very dry diet. And as you know, what you eat, you can tell through your scat. So when they eat all that dry stuff, we get really good pellets. And that's typically what we see. But when they transition, their stomach takes a little bit of time to adjust. And they're transitioning from that dry diet to a very succulent diet of fresh forbs and grasses that are coming up. And they are loving it and they are eating it. And their digestion is showing it. So this is sort of deer scat on a very succulent diet. And it comes out sort of looking like Hershey squirts, as my kids would call them. And that is kind of what we're seeing here. They'll transition, their body will adjust to eating this succulent diet, and they'll have their scat will kind of pellet up again. And they'll get, you'll notice a difference in color between winter scat and summer scat. And the winter scat is sort of a brown or tannish color, and summer scat is often darker and blacker. And that's because they're eating more kind of juicy material. And they can also continue to have this sort of juicy scat for a while till their body adjusts. So those of you who thought it might be Hershey on a chocolate bar on a sunny day, that could be, but I wouldn't eat this scat. No, I wouldn't do the taste test on this. That's pretty gross. All right, let's go on. Oh, okay. This is a long narrative, so bear with me, but it is funny. Taken April 24th on the upper stretches of Moose Brook. As I wandered upstream in search of the elusive eastern brook trout, my eye caught something bright, white, and egg-shaped on a rock in the middle of the stream. Alas, it was an egg, intact. Without a crack, I gently shook it. Yes, intact and jellyish inside, like an egg. About 2 inches long, as you can see from the photo, with scale. Seems too small for a wild turkey. And this had no speckles. It seems too big for rough grouse, about the right size for a chicken egg. But what would a hen be doing in such a crazy place? And how did the egg get there unscathed? Did it float down there and deposit itself as high water receded? Float from where? Carpenter's Marsh? Did an animal leave it there uneaten? Who would leave a good meal? One plausible explanation, of course, is the Easter Bunny. But what would the EB be doing around there? Fishing on his day off? It reminded me of when my parents had Easter eggs around the house. And when I was a kid and we found them in June. What say you, Mr. and Mrs. and Miss Ask a Naturalist? Wow, that is quite the story. That is from Eric Aldrich, who is quite the fisherman out there. And I'm going to ask Phil, since it is an egg and I'm assuming it's from a bird. Phil Brown, what do you got on this? Hopefully.
There we go.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. Indeed, it is a bird. I don't think it's a platypus, so on Moose Brook. So it must be from a bird. And yeah, Eric took note of the size, which is really helpful. And it is really odd to see an egg in a strange place. A chicken would be pretty unlikely in Moose Brook, having to cross water. So my guess would be that this is the ubiquitous mallard duck. Mallards are a familiar green-headed duck that many of us will see. That the males have a green head, the females are rather drab brown, and they are prolific breeders. They were introduced from the west for hunting purposes, so they're not native to our eastern wooded landscapes. That's a surprise to a lot of people. So mallards were brought in for hunting purposes in the early to mid 1900s. So, you know, for a long time they were just not recorded here at all. They've done very well as a species. They've expanded around the region, and part of their ability to do so well is to be very adaptable to human development, and even strange places. So they have a habit of laying eggs in strange places, making nests in strange places. It's odd that there would be just one egg that's not associated with the nest, because mallards will build a little bit of a depression. They'll put feathers, the lime feathers, in a clump of grasses. They'll usually nest on the ground, but not always. Sometimes they nest on rooftops or even gravel areas, like, you know, outside buildings. One was known to nest in the rain gutter on a roof of a 4-story building, incubating seven eggs. So there's some interesting little factoids about mallards and the strange places that they will make their nests. The females do all the egg rearing. In this case, the egg was simply deposited because maybe the bird did not have a nest at that point, where its nest was raided. Ducks have a habit of kind of dumping eggs periodically, sometimes in different nests, or I suppose sometimes in places like this, which seems very odd. But yeah, typically the size of a chicken egg. They're rather kind of dull. They don't have a little bit of a sheen to the shell. So that really fits the description really well for mallard. But yeah, usually you see a whole nest associated with it.
Well, Phil, I have a serious question for you. Would you consider this an odd duck?
Very, very odd.
It's a very odd duck. Okay.
Yep.
Now that was really great. Thank you. Okay, here comes our next question. Near a very stinky pond off the Wapak in Sharon Temple, no sign of beaver, look like mud, but we're on an unused trail with no human activity to be seen. This was near the stinky pond and looked as if someone had just come out to deposit it. Would love to know what the naturalists might think it could be and why the pond was so incredibly stinky. We did not stay long. M. All right, I'm going to answer the first part of this question as to what it is. This looks to me like a haul out, which some mammals do to scent mark. And if it's near a pond and there was no sign of beaver, that doesn't mean that there wasn't a beaver there somewhere. So if there's a beaver anywhere along the pond, and that could be maybe not where the trail is, but on another side, beavers will scrape together a bunch of mud and muck and leaves and pile it on the edge of the pond, and they'll scent mark it with their castoreum. And that's just a marker, a signpost, kind of alerting everybody in the other animals in the area and other beavers that that pond is their pond. And they're very active, but they're not the only animals that scent mark like this. This could also be a otter, and otters are very involved in scent marking. If you ever have had a chance to see any on trail cams near the water, they spend a lot of time urinating and rubbing their glands on scent mounds like this, and it would be stinky. A beaver will have an odor too. Castoreum has an odor, but otter otter haulouts have a very fishy odor. So when Em is talking about a very stinky pond, it's hard to know is what the stink is actually like. So when we see a pile like this, I would get down low, I would look at it, I would kind of check it out. Do I see any kind of jelly or poop-like stuff, scat-like stuff on top of it? That's can be very otterish. If it has fish scales near it, it's another sign it could be an otter. It will have a very fishy odor. If you have a dog with you, a dog will love to roll in it, and you'll curse your dog because they'll smell terrible. So could be an otter, could be a beaver. Those are the two ones that would leave a mark like this. I'd have to get down and smell it and really look at it more closely. But I wanted to ask Karen Seaver if you would weigh in a little bit about what could make a pond extra smelly at this time of the year.
Yeah, sure. I just got a great visual image of you on your hands and knees sniffing this pile.
Yes,
Susan.
yes, I would do it, Karen.
I know you would. Yeah, stinky ponds. We all have been by one, and microbes can be responsible for stinky water bodies. And I'm not sure the time of year this photo was taken, but interestingly, different microbes are active at different times of the year. And anytime you have anaerobic respiration involved, which is cellular respiration without access to oxygen, you produce a lot of stinky gases like methane and hydrogen sulfide. So if this were in a boggy area just after thawing, there could have been a lot of off-gassing happening. And then we're just about to enter the time of year where we start to see algal activity and cyanobacteria activity. Those are typically indicated by greenish scums on the surface of the water. They also can have an odor associated with them. So there's a variety of different microbes that are responsible for an incredible amount of gas production. And you can sometimes identify microbes by the odor. So that you can apply that also to the microbial world, similarly to the mammalian world.
Wow, that's fascinating. So you're saying that you can actually learn to smell the difference and identify an odor, like what the microbe is by its odor?
I've been at a conference where we've been asked to waft tubes of various microbes to practice these sort of scent IDs, you might call them.
Wow, that is so cool. That is so cool. I was listening to something about a woman who could smell diseases. She was like a super sniffer. It's that kind of weird, Anyway, everybody do some deep breathing. This is a good time of year, whether you're sniffing stinky pond and trying to figure that out. But how about flowers? You could sniff some good flowers and clean your nose palette that way. Wow, thank you, Karen. Let's see what our next question is, Miles. Okay, this is going to be a sound. First, I'll read this, and then we'll listen to the sound all together. This strange sound, which I can only describe as a quark, is often heard during the day along with other songbirds around a house away in the suburban North Mass. It generally is heard from the same area, but most recently, the direction seemed to have changed and sounded a bit closer, possibly a tree. I don't recall hearing this last year. A birdsong recognition app seemed to think it's a mallard, but further research leaves me even more confused. Listen at 4 seconds of the clip for the quark. Thank you, Golden Ear. They must be referring to Phil Brown. Phil and everybody else, let's take a listen. Miles, can you? Yeah.
It's a little quiet, but could you hear it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe you want to play it one more time for everybody else, but
yeah,
I'm happy to chime in. All right.
What is that, Phil?
Did you hear that little kind of a rolling, garbled, quick song at the end? It was a call. And I bet that's a familiar sound to several of you all if you're in anywhere in the Monadnock region or anywhere south of here. Anybody want to chime in with the guess? Watching the
Yeah, if you have it,
no.
if you have a guess, put it in the chat. Phil, it looks like we're a robin.
No, good guess. So it is a bird for sure. A bird, no.
Miles has got a lot of guesses.
Woodpecker. Okay, we're getting somewhere. Woodpecker. Red-bellied woodpecker. Yeah, Carl, you got it. That is indeed the rolling call of the red-bellied woodpecker, which is now becoming a very familiar backyard bird for many of us, as this is a southern species that is expanding its range north. And it has been doing that for several decades, but is now very much a breeding resident in our area around the Harris Center, and even into far northern New Hampshire in the past several years. So a species that is that does very well in oak forests traditionally. They are oak and acorn specialists, and you know, other seeds and nuts are a big part of their diet. So bird feeders have helped them, and you know, it's a bird that is probably here to stay at this point. So it does that little rolling call, and keep an eye out for them. They're often confused with red-headed woodpeckers because people see a big long red stripe on the crown of the bird. If you saw a red-headed woodpecker, its entire face and head would be bright blood red, so unmistakable. That bird is a lot more unusual in this area, but still possible. So keep an eye out for the red-bellied woodpecker. They like peanuts at your bird feeders, but feeders in at this point. Bears are all over the place.
Miles, can you play it again? There's been some requests. Maybe we'll play it 2 more times.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Phil. Or now we will now just refer to you as Golden Ear. Thank you, Golden Ear. Oh, it's turn the tables. All right, there's going to be an image in just a moment. If you know what it is, please put your answer in the chat. And for this one, Miles, we're giving out a prize, right? For the first correct answer. And we're going to have, who's our judge on the first correct answer?
Brett.
Brett. Okay, so Brett, are you ready? I think she is. Okay, so here comes the picture. We're taking, Brett, before people answer, are you looking for the common name? Here goes, a common name. Double credit if you
name for sure.
Common name.
There's 2 common names that are acceptable. Carl, you're on top of it tonight. Fringed polygala, or also sometimes known as gay wings. That's what this is, and you responded like instantaneously, so you are our winner. And this is one of our spring ephemeral wildflowers. I bet Karen Seaver or Phil probably know more about the flower than I do, but I will say that I was really excited to see this today, a few hours ago, on my walk on our Hiroshi Loop Trail along in a section of the trail that overlooks Nubinusset Brook. And it does get its name from those kind of wing-like projections, and the little the fringed part is as you can see, I don't have a pointer to show you, but kind of at the tip of the flower there. This is a primarily bumblebee pollinated flower. It's low growing, so they're quite small. We don't really have scale in this picture, but they're low to the ground. And I don't know, does Karen or Phil or anyone else want to say more about the flower? I just kind of know what it is, but I don't know much about its life history.
I'll just say a couple things and I'll pass it to Phil. Sometimes this is called flowering wintergreen, even though it's not wintergreen. But if you know wintergreen and you look at the leaves, it looks like that. But the wintergreen flower is a droopy white little flower. This is in the milkwort family. So there's a little, if you prick the leaf, there's a little bit of, it's not quite like milkweed, but there's a little color to the sap. And the other cool thing is the little fringe there, like Brett mentioned, is sort of like the landing platform for the bumblebees. And if you've ever seen a bumblebee feeding on lupin, they have to kind of do the same thing. They actually have to push the fringe down in order to expose the nectar producing structure, which is also where the female part of the flower is that would accept the pollen. So it's this pretty neat interactive system. So if you've ever watched a lupin, they sort of have the same thing where the bee has to push down on the flower, and you can even, you know, get it to do that yourself if you ever play with it. But it's a neat flower interaction to watch, and they're low growing, like Brett mentioned, just a few inches above the forest floor. And I typically tend to see them in coniferous dominated areas, a little bit more so than the hardwoods.
Phil Brown, do you have anything you want to add? You know,
They're pretty.
they're pretty. I noticed that KW was wondering about the green growth around it, the little things that are popping up, and she called them seedlings, but maybe Phil or Karen or Brett, you want to talk about what those are? Miles is using the cursor to point to them.
It's club moss, some form of club moss, which is a branching form of moss. And it has all sorts of different forms. So if you've ever seen what look, sometimes they're called fairy pines on the forest floor, there's all these different iterations of club moss that have this sort of three-dimensional structure rather than just being sort of a flat blanket on the ground. So I don't know, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head the particular species, but that's the type of lower plant that is.
Yeah, pretty cool. And good observation, KW. And Carl, congratulations. You really are on fire. And no, we keep our slides and our script in we keep it in the Harris Center safe, so nobody sees it. So Carl has not received an advanced copy of this, but Carl, if you could give Miles your address in the chat privately, then we will send you a Harris Center hat for you to wear, which will be exciting. All right, Miles, are we ready for the next slide? Oh, good. This one gave me agita. Would love to know your thoughts on this track. Was in mud along with raccoon and partridge in Temple. Width is equal to the width of the partridge. So, Miles, if you could point to the slide with the raccoon and the bird track, let's start with that. So yes, those are raccoon tracks down in the five-toed, and there's 5 toes on each, the front and the back paw. The front paw is the one that looks like a little human hand, and the back paw looks more like just a regular animal track, and that is definitely raccoon. It kind of gives you a little bit of the image of how they move with their front and back feet kind of waddling along side by side, kind of a boxy step, and then cutting through it is a bird track. And I'm just going to check in with Phil about what bird you think that might be. You think partridge, or do you have another thought on that, Phil?
Well, it is pretty large, huh? It does. I'm trying to do the math here in my head, but the raccoon track, I'm guessing, would be maybe the 2 to 3 inch range.
Yeah, a little smaller, 1.5 to 2 inch range. It's not,
Huh. Okay, so maybe that isn't quite big enough to be a great blue heron's track, but the right sort of habitat, as it's in a muddy area, maybe heron, which is the common water bird of our area that has that kind of large foot, might be stalking frogs or tadpoles or something at this point in mud. I'm trying to eliminate turkey, but turkey tracks are pretty large as well. So partridge tracks, I'm trying to see where the partridge tracks are, but
yeah.
is that the left
No,
side?
this one down here, so I think they were thinking this was a partridge track.
That
the
was
one
the
here,
part.
raccoon track.
Okay, okay, that makes more sense. All right.
And Brett's suggesting maybe a crow, which could also be.
Okay.
Could it be, Phil? I know my mammal tracks.
It could be actually. Yeah, come to think of it, that does seem to be the right size and shape for what's referred to as a partridge, which would be a ruffed grouse. So which is the track in question?
Well,
Actually,
the mysterious track is the one in its own, it's incense. It's kind of its own box. And that one is hard to make out. And so when I spent a lot of time looking at this at all different sizes and squinting my eye at it and trying to like look at it really close. And you know, the fact that it's kind of in mud, it's hard to see any distinctive track other than what's running up the middle, kind of like of it. And that could be a drag. So it could be a tail drag. It could be the body, the side of the body dragging. The footprints are kind of in a waddle, a side by side. This is just what I'm seeing, but I will just say, sometimes in Ask a Naturalist, you get one that's a stumper, and this one is a little bit of a stumper. Salamander.
I think it could be actually a salamander because I guess it depends on what else was in that area, but I've seen salamander tracks, spotted salamander tracks on snow, like on a very rare occasion. They're not usually out and about on snow, but every once in a while, somebody sees one walking across the snow and has sent me tracks. And they're similar to this because there's the body drag and very tiny feet.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's hard. It's really hard to know. But that would be a guess that I might have as a large salamander, like a spotted salamander or a spring salamander, depending on how far this was from water.
Yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time trying to find a mammal that it could be like, but it does not really fit a mammal track. It's hard to see the feet. I like your thought, Brett, on the salamander and your description of the body drag with the tiny feet.
And Karen's asking about a turtle, like a hatchling. I suppose that's possible, although I feel like it'd be a little more rounded and gouged out a little, maybe a little bit more than this one. Has that linear feel to it, which is what made me think salamander versus, you know.
Think if it was a turtle hatchling, it would be a little wider, even if it was a very small, you know, they're like, the painted turtles are about this size right now. Same with the snappers that are hatched in the spring. It would be, I think, wider and more obscured maybe by the shell drag. But I don't know. That's a good mystery. I don't know if Emma's in the audience, but if Emma's here, if you wanted to add any more details. Mysterious M. Just wait a minute.
Is this you, Miles? Are you M? No.
Well, if you come across any more tracks like this, anybody out there, what would really be helpful too is just to have a little bit more sense of the scale. They compare it to, width is equal to the width of the partridge. So they're saying it's compared to the bird footprint that's by the raccoon, but that's really hard to compare that to the track that we're seeing. Is that, and to not know for sure if it's a partridge or a crow, that could make a difference too. So I do think the track on the right belongs to a grouse, as M indicated. That's what Phil's saying. So we've done well. We've gotten the raccoon and the grouse. And then I'm going with Brett. I feel like that was so good, Brett, that you suggested that. It had me tearing my hair out. So thank you so much. Yeah, a dollar bill is a good reference, a quarter, anything like that. Oh, on to something else for Brett to think about. So we have a giant salamander living in our basement. He or she wintered there in a cozy hole under a threshold, and we saw it many times throughout the cold months. What can we do? I can't read it because there's a chat over my window. What can we do to take it to a more suitable and enjoyable habitat? I have no idea how it landed in our basement. LOL. Any tips you have would be so appreciated. Brett, what do you think they should do about their giant salamander?
So this is one of 4 emails I got with the same question this winter. And I usually get 1 or 2 a winter, but this year was a I guess there were more salamanders in basements this year than, or people found their way to me to ask. So this happens, especially if you have, so these spotted salamanders spend 95% of their lives underground, primarily moving through and living in tunnels created by small mammals. So they don't dig their own tunnels, they use other mammal tunnels. So if you have an older house with an unfinished basement, I'm guessing you probably also have mice, small mammals that have found their way into your house. And if a small mammal can find its way in, particularly underground, then a spotted salamander can find its way in through those same openings. And so it does happen. And your basement's a pretty safe, cool, probably damp place to spend the winter. If you have the kind of basement where, so giant salamanders, that's a good question. How big are these spotted salamanders? These spotted salamanders can be 8 to 10 inches long and kind of as thick around as a thumb. I'm assuming that that's what they meant by this one. These are really the biggest salamanders that we have in our neck of the woods. There are truly giant salamanders that live in on the West Coast and in Japan that are like what are they? They're like 2 feet long and enormous, but we don't have those around here. So spotted salamanders, what I usually recommend, and I wish John Benjamin was here because one of these salamanders in question ended up with him for the winter. So if it's spring, fall, or summer, I recommend putting the salamander back outside on the next wet night. Probably if you have a spotted salamander in your basement, you have woods near your house, and that's where they need to be eventually, where they want to be. So if you put them out on a wet night, they will find their way home. If it's the middle of winter, you don't want to put a salamander out to fend for itself in deep snow or in really cold temperatures, and in which case you can let it overwinter on its own in your basement. Assuming that you've got invertebrates for it to feed on periodically. You probably do if you've got a basement that is unfinished and has some tunnels leading into it from the outdoors. John Benjamin, our naturalist who often answers mushroom questions, but also knows a great deal about lots of things, including herps. This winter, there was someone who wrote us and said, I don't want to take care of this salamander over the winter, but I also don't want to put it out in the woods to die in the middle of a snowstorm. So John took it in and basically kept it in a container with dirt and moss and leaves and sprayed it with water every so often to keep it damp. And when it's cold, they're not very active. So you don't have to worry very much if you keep them kind of cool in a cool, dark place, that they can basically just hang out until spring. And I think he periodically would put a mealworm or a cricket in there. And sometimes the salamander would eat and sometimes it wouldn't, because when they're colder, their metabolism is slower and they don't need as much food. So basically, if you find a salamander in your basement in the warmer months, just put it back outside. If it's wintertime and you don't want it roaming around, you can put it in a container with some moss and leaves and dirt and keep it in a cool, dark place for the winter, and then let it go on one of the first warm, rainy nights of spring, and it will find its way. And one thing I always like to tell people is these salamanders do not live in water. So people tend to think of frogs and salamanders as being water dwellers and think that they need to bring them to water. These salamanders breed in water, but the rest of their lives they spend underground. So they just need to be in the woods. And you have to worry about touching it. A little bit. Salamanders, like all amphibians, have semi-porous skin and they're very sensitive to toxins. So there's a big misconception about whether the natural oils on your hands can harm amphibians, and that's a myth. But there's lots of things that we put on our hands that can harm amphibians, like hand sanitizer, bug spray, lotion, sunscreen, all of that. So if you needed to pick a salamander up and handle it briefly, it's always good to handle animals, if you have to handle them at all, for not very much time. You don't want to stress them out, but if you have to handle one briefly, say to remove it from your basement, just make sure you've washed your hands with soap and water and that they're clean and wet and that you don't have any chemicals on them.
Thank you, Brett. That was awesome. And I wish I had a salamander living in my basement. Maybe next winter. Okay, this is a new category in our Ask a Naturalist. We occasionally have what's wrong with this picture. So this is a picture found on Amazon, and we would like you to tell us what is wrong with this picture. And this one, we aren't giving out a prize, but we are just hoping that you will take a moment and put your answer in the chat. It was a picture. You could buy this feeder on Amazon. Okay, good job. Answers are rolling in. All right, Phil, golden ear Phil, what's wrong with this picture, Phil Brown? Maybe
I don't think you need to ask me that question.
people are right. Hummingbirds want nectar.
Yeah, also the species that are pictured are not the ones we would see for hummingbirds. So
Actually, there was a question at the beginning of the program about someone seeing a hummingbird, I assume on the East Coast. Phil, do you know what species that would be?
on the East Coast, yeah, just about every hummingbird in east of the Mississippi River is going to be a ruby-throated hummingbird. Very rarely, there are some western strays that show up, and that usually happens in late summer or early fall. So there have been several other species from the Southwest that have made brief appearances at people's feeders. So it's always worth keeping your feeders out a little bit longer. Hummingbirds usually exit by mid-September in this area, but it's not a bad idea to keep those feeders going in case you do have a stray that might stick around and take advantage of your free food source.
Wow, great job to everybody who either said it was the wrong type of feeder or the wrong type of feed. That is correct. If you find any weird pictures that you think are incorrect, send them to us. We'll be including this in part of our Ask a Naturalist program when it comes to us. So keep us posted. Okay. Here it goes. I've attached a photo of a squirrel that was either napping or basking in the sun at the base of the tree in our yard. I was watching him from our kitchen window and thought it was a curious situation since all the other squirrels in and around our yard usually scurry about without ever staying put in one spot on the ground for very long. However, I was watching the squirrel resting in this spot for a good 5 to 10 minutes, and many times its eyes would stay closed for a few moments, as if it was nodding off and struggling to stay awake. It did quickly run off when I opened the back door to see if I could get a closer look. Is it common for squirrels to nap or enjoy basking in the sun like this on the ground, or rather in a tree? And thanks for all you do. So yes, actually, and reptiles aren't the only animals that like to bask in the sun. Mammals will too. And if you've noticed, this spring has been a little bit on the chilly side, and the animals will have begun to lose their winter pelage or their winter fur and might feel a little chilly. And so it is possible to see something like a gray squirrel basking or sitting in the sun or soaking it up and resting. And I would say that this is probably an older and mature squirrel, a confident squirrel, not having to worry so much about anybody intruding on his territory. When squirrels they're very territorial, gray squirrels, and you probably noticed this from the antics outside your feeder or in your area. They chase each other. But if you're like king of the king, you don't have to worry so much. You've already established that you're king of the king or queens of the queens or whatever. You can just sort of sit in your laurels. And if you spend time watching squirrels, you'll notice that they often stay very still and alert when they're in a resting position. And you might think that they're resting, but they are paying attention very carefully to everything that's around you. And I would almost bet that when you open the door or when you made noise towards it, it did run off faster than you could imagine. So even though it looks like it's resting, it might be nodding off and closing its eyes. It is definitely aware of what's going on around it. So yeah, keep your eye open for this, especially on cool spring days. And then again, when it gets really hot, squirrels change their behavior in the summertime. They'll only kind of come out during the hottest parts of the day. Well, when it's hot like that, they'll come out in the morning, like early in the morning to about 10 in the morning. And then again, they'll come out again in the late afternoon. So, golden ear is currently birding. All right, golden ear, get ready. This could be for you. Steve Robert sent in this photo of a dissected something or other he found in his driveway in Peterborough. He wasn't sure if it was scat or as it did not have a very distinctive shape and it fell apart easily. He thought it might be a pellet and wondered if it could be from a heron on account of, it's hard for me to see because I've got a chat of the claws and the predaceous diving beetle exoskeleton. So looking at this, it does not qualify in my mind as scat. It is too crumbly. The pieces of the animal are too complete to have passed through the whole kind of digestive system. So I think it's a pellet, and that's why I'm referring it to golden ear, otherwise known as Phil Brown. Phil, what is this? He might be birding.
Yeah.
Is he MIA birding?
Yeah, I think Steve made a very good identification of what the contents were, looking at that central claw. That's pretty distinctive right there, for one of the crayfish claws. So, something that feeds in the water. And around here, if it is going to be a bird, it could be a few things, but great blue heron is the most likely culprit in this case. And they will sometimes regurgitate pellets containing the contents of things that they can't digest too well. So the hard exoskeleton of something like a crayfish would come out. And you mentioned that there was also diving beetle exoskeletons. Was that the bottom piece maybe? Can anybody make out?
I think that's at the bottom there.
Bottom, right? Yeah. So yeah, somebody was doing some fishing, and I think that was an April photo. I want to say. So at that time of year, for critters that feed in the water for birds, it's very likely to be a great blue heron, which can show up in some strange places, maybe depositing. Actually, we've had questions about herons in strange places before on this particular program. So herons will show up on treetops sometimes and perch in migration in odd places. So possibly it regurgitated this pellet from a tree over his driveway, or maybe just on the ground, which is less likely, but possible as well.
And Phil, Brett had a good question about pellets. I know this comes up a lot. A lot of people just hear of pellets and they think of owls, but other birds produce pellets as well. Could you just give us a quick intro on Pellets 101?
Pellets 101. Well, sure. Feel free to chime in too. Anybody else who knows more about pellets, but yeah, typically owls will regurgitate the contents of food that they cannot get down, hair and bones, and usually very dry contents that come out of its mouth after it is partially digested. So depending on the size of the bird, the size of the pellet corresponds to the size of the bird. So for a large owl, it could be a couple of inches long, and for a tiny bird, it could be quite a bit smaller. So all the owls do it. Some of the water birds as well. And even occasionally hawks. So yeah, usually it's those dry contents that can't be digested otherwise. Owls and other birds will also deposit a whitewash, which is a buildup of uric acid from other contents that are digested, and that will come out the other end. But pellets, that's out the mouth.
All right, thank you. Pellets 101. Hopefully people haven't had their dinner yet. I mean, have had their dinner or maybe haven't. I don't know. We'll see. All right. Trisha and I were hiking the Balancing Rock Trail in Pillsbury State Park when we came across this pretty little flower. The higher up we climbed, the more prolific they became. What is it? Thanks, David. So I'm going to refer this to Brett or Karen. What do you guys know about this little beauty that's here?
Well, I'm going to turn it. I think I can tell you what it is, but I'm sure Karen can tell you more about it because she knows flowers better than I do. But as Susie said, this is known as a spring beauty. It's another one of our spring ephemeral wildflowers that can be seen in clusters. And Karen, what else do you know about it? I'm sure it's a lot.
Well, this one, I mean, it is beautiful. It looks a lot like some other spring wildflowers that it can be confused for, the like trailing arbutus or ones like that. Though a lot of those have fleshier stems. This one isn't very succulent, so that's one way to tell it apart. It typically has streaks like this, but sometimes they can either be all white or all pink. This one has a really wide distribution, and I've seen pictures that like sometimes it's referred to as the Carolina spring beauty, and when you get down into the Smoky Mountains, this becomes almost like a ground cover in the spring. This is another really important food for early pollinators, and especially hoverflies. They're a bug that looks a lot like a bee, but is actually a fly. Is one of the earliest emerging dipterans, and they are particularly entranced by this isn't a highly nectar producing flower. So a lot of times the bumblebees and Apis melliflora European honeybees will go to flowers that are a little bit more strong in the nectar producing category. So this is kind of left to some of the other kind of smaller flying insects. So that's what I would say about this one. And in terms of distribution, this is like, this flower loves, kind of like you can see here, leaf litter. It really loves to sort of poke out from areas that are relatively barren, other vegetation. And to that end, it likes, rich soils, but it can also tolerate pretty acidic conditions that tend to form in soils underneath, coniferous stands. So has a pretty wide niche.
Great, thank you so much. I think we have time for one more, Miles. Do we have one more?
Sure.
Oh, no, we do? All right, here we go. This one is for you, Jeremy Wilson. Are you out there? Get ready. Put down your cocktail. Here it goes. A few times ago, you talked about pine cones, male and female, this year. But maybe I never noticed them before, but there sure seem to be a lot of the female cones at the tops of the trees, and they are still here. Have I just been blind to them, or are they an unusual number of female cones still on the trees this year? Thank you, from Lida. Jeremy, what do you got to say about the cones on top of this tree?
Well, if people have been walking out in pine stands in this region this spring, they'll have noticed that the white pines have a tremendous number of brown overmature cones. So these are cones that have already dropped their seeds last fall. And the pine cones are really interesting. That seed that matured last fall and dropped in August and September, that was actually 2.5 years old. So it began its life in the spring of 2018 was when that cone was fertilized, and then it took that long to develop. And then the cones mature, the bracts open up, and the seeds fall on the ground. And so we had a huge white pine seed crop last fall. One of the things that's probably leading to all sorts of huge numbers of rodents and huge numbers of ticks that we're seeing this spring. But it also was interesting that a lot of the cones didn't seem to drop off the tree. Usually they drop off in the fall or in the spring. They can last on the tree for quite a while, but in this case, there seemed to be a lot of them lasting on the tree for quite a while. There's a stand I go to in Hancock that you literally can't walk on the ground right now because everywhere there are so many pine cones on the ground that you're basically elevated on pine cones everywhere you walk. So it's just remnants of a huge seed crop that we had. But the interesting thing being that relates all the way back to pollen from the spring of 2018.
And Jeremy, Lida's just followed up with a question about how does the seed crop relate to ticks? So you want to go over that with How come it's such a big tick year? How is that connected to this seed crop?
Yeah, I think anything that promotes or allows for small mammal populations to explode. And so that would be the mass producing species like white pine or oak. Allows for the populations to grow rapidly, and then those populations support high levels of ticks. So
Well, it seems like
all related.
a kind of not that fun way to end our Ask a Naturalist, but we are out of time. And that is a good reminder. If you're out and about looking at all the natural world, don't forget to do tick checks on yourself and remind your family members. And join us back for a June Ask a Naturalist on June 17th, 5:30 to 6:30. In the meantime, send us some more questions. We haven't had any good mushroom questions in a while. Send us some fungus questions. We're looking for some insect questions, amphibian and reptile questions, always good scat questions, things like that. And birds, we're going to keep testing golden ear over there till we see what happens, reaches limits. I don't think we will. But thank you so much, everybody, for showing up this evening for our May Ask a Naturalist. Thank you to all the panelists that asked questions, all the people that sent in the questions, and all of you that showed up to learn about this. Hopefully you'll all get outside and enjoy the beautiful sights and smells and just the beauty of May and June to come. See you all June 17th. Thank you. Ciao.